Students pledge for celibacy. Friday at 6:30.
President Clinton, fresh from his big NAFTA victory, arrives in Seattle for the Pacific Rim Summit. American Airlines, the nation's largest carrier, tries to fly through a strike. And major drug charges against the World Wrestling Federation. Steroids.
This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, reporting tonight from Seattle.
Good evening from Seattle, from Queen Anne Hill, and President Clinton at this hour is already in meetings, the first of 2 days of meetings with leaders of the Pacific nations. By the turn of the century, these nations will have more than half the world's population to go with exploding economic growth throughout the region. So President Clinton wanted to arrive here with the additional muscle of NAFTA. That, of course, is the North American Free Trade Agreement. And as NBC's Andrea Mitchell tells us, he got what he wanted.
It was a triumphant Bill Clinton who arrived in Seattle, savoring the biggest victory of his presidency. A few weeks ago, he could count only 32 members of his own party on his side. But when the roll was called, he had 102 Democrats. And with Republican help, 16 more votes than he needed to win. The decisive vote was proof that Mr. Clinton could deliver on his promises to other world leaders, an enormous boost on the eve of this summit.
Make no mistake about it, ultimately this meeting is about the jobs, the incomes, and the futures of the American people.
Before leaving for Seattle, Mr. Clinton said approval of NAFTA was critical to improving trade with Asia.
By taking the courageous step of opening trade in our own hemisphere, we have the economic, the political, and the moral standing to make the case that that ought to be done throughout the world. That America is serious about lowering trade barriers and promoting growth in our country and throughout the globe.
The president will be using a carrot and stick approach in this unprecedented meeting of Asian leaders, representing a market of 2 billion people. He wants the Chinese to improve their human rights record and stop selling missiles abroad. In exchange, he'll offer continued favorable trade treatment due to expire next year. Most urgently, he is seeking China's help in getting North Korea to stop its nuclear weapons program. The summit will also be Mr. Clinton's first chance to urge Japan's new prime minister to buy more American goods and export less. Looking east is crucial to the president's global trade policy.
I think he will strengthen the ties that we have with many of the most dynamic economies in the world so that we can have stronger trade and investment opportunities across the Pacific.
Tonight, the president met with the Prime Minister of Thailand and later with Canada's new leader. In these talks, he's bargaining from strength, having proved that he'll fight for something in which he believes and can win. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Seattle.
Secretary of State Christopher is busy with meetings here this evening, but earlier today I did talk to him about getting the Chinese to improve human rights. Mr. Secretary, you told the Chinese that they must do this early and we must have visible signs. How early and what signs on human rights from Beijing?
Well, it's a year-long situation, Tom, but we need to have some signs from them over the next several months rather than waiting until late spring. I think Congress will be watching this situation, so we need to have some kind of progress. We need to have overall significant progress in the human rights area. Dissidents need to be freed. There need to be some prison visits by the ICRC, and they would be very desirable if they took some steps with respect to Tibet.
And what steps in respect to Tibet would be acceptable to this administration?
Well, I think it would be a big step forward if they began a dialogue with the Dalai Lama. I think the human rights conditions in Tibet itself are very serious, very adverse, and I think either of those would be most important.
You also issued a sharp warning to North Korea again yesterday, threatening to go to the United Nations. What are we talking about with North Korea? Are we still talking only about a trade embargo, or is there the possibility of some kind of military action?
Let me first say what we want to try to achieve there, Tom, is to get them to comply with the international inspections that are required by the International Atomic Energy Agency. We also want them to carry out their nuclear dialogue with South Korea that they've agreed on. We would like to solve this problem by diplomatic means, but if we're unable to do that, then our recourse would be back to the UN Security Council to discuss measures other than negotiations. I think it's not useful to talk about various options at the present time. They would begin with sanctions, but I think there would be the whole panoply of possible options.
Briefly, Mr. Secretary, will the NAFTA agreement help the president in his one-on-one relations with Japan when it comes to trade?
There's no doubt that he comes here with a new degree of credibility and confidence that'll help him in dealing with the bilateral meetings with Japan and China. It will help him in the overall meetings with the summit leaders from other countries in Asia. So he comes here, I think, hoping to achieve a triple play, winning NAFTA, having a successful meeting here, and then on to a successful conclusion of GATT.
Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for being with us tonight. Secretary of State Warren Christopher about 2.5 hours ago here in Seattle. You know, it's hard to overstate the economic potential of Asia over the next several years. Take just one statistic. It contains more than 1 billion homes of consumers. And in his Insiders Report tonight, NBC's chief financial correspondent Mike Jensen tells us that's just the beginning of the numbers.
The Pacific Rim is America's largest and fastest growing trading partner, partly because of exports of products like these $200,000 ultrasound machines. This one is going to China. The Pacific Rim countries, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico on this side of the Pacific, and 14 others, including Japan and China on the other side, have 40% of the world's population and account for more than $500 billion worth of U.S. trade. That's more than twice as much as U.S. trade with Europe. The purpose of this conference is to open the Pacific Rim to even more commerce. The Port of Seattle does more than 85% of its business with Asian countries, and more of these ships are heading for China. So the Pacific Rim is very important. The administration says it will mean more jobs, but insiders say it's also controversial because of this. Asian factories where workers make 30 cents an hour, churning out products for American companies to sell in the United States. That costs American workers jobs. And increasingly, the products America exports don't provide many jobs. It doesn't take many people to make these machines. Furthermore, the workers have to be very skilled, and that's changing the nature of the American workforce. The blue collar is giving way to the blue lab coat. On the other side of the equation, insiders point out that cheap foreign labor keeps the price of the product down, so American consumers benefit.
A jacket that we would manufacture in Asia and sell at retail for $125. If we manufacture the same garment here, it would probably be $225.
The Pacific Rim countries now account for 54% of total U.S. trade, involving thousands of companies. Treetop Incorporated is a good example. It makes apple juice in Washington and sells it in places like China. But Treetop says it could sell even more if China would reduce the tariff Treetop has to pay on every can or bottle it sells there.
The tariffs now are anywhere from 70 to over 100% on product into China.
That's one of the challenges for the U.S. at this APEC conference, to get foreign tariffs down. As for American businesses' search for cheap foreign labor, insiders say that's a fact of life and it won't go away. In fact, it's accelerating. Helly Hansen is making jackets in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh instead of Korea.
The cost of producing goods in Korea is equivalent now to the cost of producing goods in the USA.
This is tough on less skilled Americans whose jobs are being exported. The hope is that more open markets in the Pacific Rim will create millions of new jobs in this country. Mike Jensen, NBC News, Seattle.
Hotel workers here in Seattle were particularly eager to see where the Sultan of Brunei would settle in for his stay. After all, in Cyprus recently, he reportedly left behind $170,000 in tips for just 300 hotel workers. Well, for the record, the Sultan is staying here at the Four Seasons Hotel. And the Four Seasons staff, always on its toes, does seem to be exceptionally agreeable this week. When Nightly News continues, the NAFTA scorecard, who won, who lost. And what do many Japanese tourists like to do in America? Fire away.